Hello, and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla, and I read a ton of books so that I can recommend the best to you. And that is what we are doing today, to the point that I think it is 19 books that we will be discussing today because it is the February wrap-up episode. This is the second time we are doing this. I will be going through every single book I read in February and giving you my thoughts, a few minutes on each book. So before we get into that, it is March, my least favorite month ever. I have been saying that since childhood. I just don't like the month of March. In a Q&A recently, someone was like, why? And I just feel like it's the biggest transition month. Wow, I can't even speak. Which actually, though, is interesting because I'm like starting a new job in this March. So I feel like there's a lot of like changes and transitions happening in my life anyway. But it's always like, is it going to be hot? Is it going to be snowing? What's the weather? I always feel anxious during March. Like I really just have never liked it. And the last few years I've been doing this kind of like manifesting a good March, and it has been working. Last year, so crazy, that UK trip I always talk about on this podcast, I left on St. Patrick's Day last year for that trip. So it is a little funny because I remember on that trip thinking like, what will my life be like in a year? And I was like, oh, I'm going to be so upset. Like, oh, a year ago I was in London, and I do feel like that. But I don't think I would have imagined my life would be like how it is now a year ago. Like so much of my life has changed. People have left my life, old podcasts have left my life, a job has left my life, but new beginnings, fresh change. February was a really big month of change for me, and I am going to, before we get into the books, I'm going to give like a little wrap up of my month. But before we do that, our March book club pick, I am so excited for. It is Listen for the Lie. I had a feeling it was going to be a book of the month pick for this month, and it is. So if you want to read along with the Professional Book Girl book club, you can get it for cheap from Book of the Month. That episode will be out on March 28th, and you could submit your thoughts, either type them up and DM them to me or email them to professionalbookgirlpod@gmail.com, or send a voice recording like we did if you listened to last month's episode for the Frozen River, and you can share your thoughts verbally and I will play it in the episode. It was really fun to have different people's voices and perspectives in the episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed that as well. Last little announcement, I still have some bookmarks that I am giving away. I mentioned that I got a print run of just 100 bookmarks, and I've been giving them out to friends and family, and the ones that are left over I want to give to you guys. So what you have to do is write a review and rate the podcast, and then just DM me saying that you did that, and I'll ask for your address, and then I will send you a bookmark and some stickers as well. And I do want to say, I know when I was basically like forcing you guys to say nice things about me by asking for a review, although you could have given a negative review, I guess, but it was really, I knew I was doing that, but it was like kind of really emotional for me to read the reviews, and it means a lot to me, to everyone who actually took the time to do that. I know you're doing it to get something out of it, but it going solo was scary, and I feel like you guys are really getting to know me in such a different way. Like you're going to hear me talk for an hour today, and that's a lot of time for one person to fill, and it can be very daunting. So it means a lot to me that you guys, it's like what I wanted to come across is coming across. I wanted it to be like we were sitting down, like we were on FaceTime, like we're just hanging out and talking about books. I didn't want it to be, the title, the word professional is in the title, but I didn't want it to be so like professional. I don't want it to be boring. It is very much, this is the way my brain works when we're all over the place. It's because this is how I think of things, and I'm talking about one thing and titles and connections come up. Like that is just how I am in real life. So I feel like you guys are really getting to know the real me on this show. When I was on a show with 3 other people, I really had to kind of stifle a lot of myself, and I wasn't always able to go as in depth about things or really say what I wanted to say. So it means a lot to me that so many of you are loving the show. And I just wanted to, that's my very roundabout way, you see what I mean, of just saying thank you so much for listening and for supporting. And I'm going to be mailing the bookmarks out tomorrow, and I'm very excited to see you guys with them. If you get a bookmark, definitely please post and tag Professional Book Girl. It will be very exciting for me. So the what I'm obsessed with portion of the episode this week really is just my month. I actually had a really good month, which was a bit of a change from January, which was nice. This was a very much so a month of change for me. And, it's the shortest month of the year, but it actually felt very long in some ways. I had so many different things going on in my life, like happy things, bad things. I mentioned on last week's episode that my uncle passed away in this month. So I was home for 10 days because I had to go to the services for that. And then I just wanted to stay and be with my mom. But I really enjoyed my time home this month. It's like that weird thing with death where you end up having like good quality time with your family members that are still alive. So I spent a lot of time with my siblings and my aunt and my cousin, and it was just really nice. I always love when my sister and I both live in the city, and when we go home, like, we stay at my mom's, and I just always really love that when we're all there. But then my ideal is that half of the time I'm home, it'll be like the house is full, we're all home, and then the other half I do enjoy being the only child home because then it's just like spoiled, so I got to do both of that. It actually snowed a lot this month with them, which I'm sure some of you listening are like, okay, whatever, but we haven't had a lot of snow in New York in a few years. And it was like, we had this big snowstorm actually the day of my uncle's wake, but it was just I love looking at snow. And I was very happy I ended up being on Long Island during the snow, because when it snows and you're in New York City, it's beautiful for like 1 minute, and then walking around in it is absolute torture. And it's just like slushy and gross. And like by the crosswalks where you're walking, you're like leaping over giant puddles of like dirty snow, and it's like not great. So I was excited that I got to see the beautiful snow on Long Island. And then by the time I came back to New York City, it was kind of cleared up. I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, but I'm starting a new job, which actually the day this episode comes out, which is very exciting because I'm starting the job 7 months to the day from when my last day was at my last job. It has been such a journey, and I've never had to look for a job before. I've always been very lucky that my first internship turned into my first job post college. I graduated with my first job, and then when I moved jobs to my last one, I was recruited. So I never had a gap of like unemployment. I actually, looking back, like, so much of it was like hard and sad, but I'm really glad that I had that break. And honestly, this show would not exist if I didn't have that break. So this is something very positive to come out of that time in my life. I feel like I learned a lot about myself, and I was able to really think about what I want in a new role. And I'm very lucky that like the three things I wanted, I got. I am fully remote, I'm working with women, and then obviously I had a certain salary in mind that I got. So I'm very excited to get back to work. I am a little bit nervous though, because I've fully been going to sleep at 1:30 in the morning, waking up at 10 for months, which is like kind of my like natural body clock. So I'm going to have to obviously switch that up. I think it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment at first, but because I'm fully remote, I think it'll be easier. But on that, like, obviously before you get a job, you have to interview. And I spent February interviewing nonstop. I was in the final rounds also with another company, and I ended up like, I basically got my pick of jobs, which was really nice. But I also was talking to other companies. I ended up having like 16 or 17 interviews in February alone. And if anyone who has ever interviewed at that volume, it is so exhausting. And I'm sure you're listening and you're like, Kayla, you love talking about yourself. Look at this. You have a whole show devoted to it. But it is so different in a job interview, and it's very exhausting and mentally taxing. And I was going through all of that while I also had like this family member very sick and dying, and it was like, it's just like a weird, crazy juxtaposition. But thankfully I got the one I wanted. I'm very excited to start. And yeah, also, while I was home, the Super Bowl happened. It was the first time I watched the Super Bowl in many years. It was the first time I ever watched the full game, obviously because of Taylor Swift. My mom became So my mom has never been a Taylor Swift fan. Like, she's gone to her concerts because she took me and my sister to Fearless and Speak Now tours back in the day before we started going alone. But like, she knows and appreciates Taylor, but my mom would never just play Taylor. But she is the most obsessed out of anybody I know with Travis and Taylor. And it's like really cute. And me and my sister were joking. We were like, of course she is, because my parents met in high school and my mom was a cheerleader and my dad was the star football player. So it just makes so much sense that my mom would be obsessed with this. But because of that, she's kind of become like she has fully become a Chiefs fan, and she is fully obsessed with Travis. And so when they made it to the Super Bowl, this was like during the week where like it was my mom's brother who passed away. So we were like, we needed the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl. I wanted it so bad for Travis and Taylor of it all, but I was like, my mom needs this win. So it was really fun. My siblings came over, we ordered food in, we all watched the game. And then when the Chiefs did win, we were like at first we were confused and we looked at my brother and we were like, wait, they won? And then we were like, my mom was screaming, we were jumping up and down, and then we played like Karma over the like surround sound speakers, and it was just a really fun moment. And it was the epitome of like Taylor and Travis really bringing families together. I come from a family where football is in our DNA. My dad played college football. My pop was a very respected high school coach. He coached all of his sons. My brother coaches football now. My uncle coaches football. Like, it's cute. They're coaching my cousin together, but football is in my family's DNA. And it took Taylor and Travis to actually get me to care about football. And that is someone coming from someone who was a cheerleader for most of her life. I still could not care less about football, but it was a really sweet moment for us all to kind of bond over that. And I know that has been happening in a lot of other households because of our girl. And then I went to Austin on a bachelorette trip, which was an experience. I had the food in Austin. Everyone was correct. I had probably the best quesadilla of my life. I actually got a chicken quesadilla. I'm usually a steak quesadilla girl. Fun fact about me. Also, Mexican food is like my favorite food. And yeah, it was so good. And then TV shows, obviously I've been keeping up with my Bravo shows, but in February, I've been obsessed with Traders. Like, just skip to season 2 if you're not watching it. It is so, so good. Love Island All-Stars, so good. I loved the all-star aspect. I loved that they all had drama on the outside that came into the villa because most of them knew each other beforehand. I really enjoyed every single episode of Love Island this time around, which is rare because it's on every single day. And like, the winter seasons are a little bit shorter than the summer ones, but when it's on every day, it's kind of hard for every episode to be like, I'm paying attention, I'm so into this. But this season, it really was. I really, really enjoyed it. And then I finally watched Love on the Spectrum. My sister and my brother's fiance were raving about it, and I was like, let me just start it. And oh my God, it has been making me so happy. I have 2 episodes left. I'm trying to go slow because I just want to sit and watch it all the time. But I like love these people so much. I've been watching them all on TikTok now. It is just so pure and wholesome and has just been making me so, so happy. And finally, what I was listening to this month, honestly, I don't listen to new music often because I'm so like creature of habit, but I started listening to Noah Kahan, if that's how you say it. Probably not, but I know I'm a million years late to it. But I'm enjoying it. That's what I'm listening to right now. Without further ado, I don't think I should ramble on about other things because I also read a lot of books this month. I'm looking now and I actually had a very good reading month. We have a lot of 4-star reads here. So a lot of books I'm really excited to talk to you about. Some I've already mentioned before, but that's just the way it goes. So get your notes app ready, get a pen, get ready to start jotting titles down because it is time for my February wrap up. My first read of February was Crescent City 3 by Sarah J. Maas, and I won't say much because it's the 3rd book in a series. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. And I know that, look, like, people had mixed opinions. My take on things like this is it's what I always say about how everyone was upset about the Game of Thrones finale. When something is hyped up this much, and what happened in this book was hyped up so much, you're bound to be disappointed. Like, it's never gonna be exactly what you wish it was gonna be. I think what happened in this book really was, like, to me, the beginning of this huge expansion that we're now going to see in this universe. And I loved the thing that I don't want to give it away, although I feel like we all know now, but there's like, people get so mad when you spoil, but also like this world has been being built for so long that it's like, I feel like you can't get mad if it's spoiled. Like, you should have been reading it years and years ago, like everybody else. And if you wanted the pure non-spoiled experience, that is my hot take. But I will try not to be specific, I guess, but I enjoyed the fun new thing we saw happen in this book. I loved the bonus chapters. I wanted more of that fun new thing, but I feel like it really opened up the gateway, kind of literally, to more exploration in this universe. I just love the whole universe, period. I really like, because I read Crescent City 1 and 2. I reread them right before reading this. I was so fully immersed in it. I love these characters. I love this world. I was very happy. I mentioned I was worried we were going to have a memory loss issue, and we didn't. So my least favorite trope didn't happen, and I was very happy with that. I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read was Invitation Only by Kate Bryan, and this is part of the Private series, which is a series I am rereading as an adult. It was my favorite series as a teenager. I gave this 4 stars. I'm not really going to say anything more about it. There is a full episode where I covered Private and kind of gave an overview of the whole series, so you can go check that out. The third one, here we go. Buckle up. I read Expiration Dates by Rebecca Searle. This is her next book. This comes out on March 19th, and I gave it 2 stars. And I was just as disappointed as some of you might be to hear that. I think she is a very divisive author. People either really love her or hate her. And until this book, I always fell on the love side. I loved In 5 Years. I loved One Italian Summer, and I loved The Dinner List. I think those are her 3 other books, but this one just did not do it for me. And that was very disappointing. So if you're not familiar with this author, she writes these, like, they're kind of all based around romance in some sense, although like In 5 Years is really about like female friendship. And then One Italian Summer is about like a mother-daughter. This one though is straight romance. And they all have this magical realism element. So the premise of this book is that the main girl, since she was a teenager, she will get a note, it'll magically appear, and it will have a guy's name and then a time period. So it'll be like 3 months, 3 years, and it will be the length of their relationship. And when the book opens up, she's going on a date and she's like, this is my forever person, because when she received a note, it only had a name. It didn't have a time period. So we follow that relationship, and it was interesting because it was like the premise of, this is the person that the universe says is going to be your forever, but is it really correct? You realize they want different things out of life. All of her books are very short. Like, this is under 300 pages. So they're pretty quick reads. And I think that's why she's very mainstream outside of the book world. My issue with this, like, I couldn't get into it. I couldn't, like, I didn't like any of the characters. I didn't care about the main couple together. And then halfway through, this plot point is introduced that changes the course of the whole book. And it was like very bizarre and didn't need to be there. And it just did not work for me. If you usually like her books, then I would maybe give it a shot. If you don't usually like her books, then I don't think you need to read this one. I only gave it 2 stars. I was kind of like hate reading it by the end because they're so short. I wasn't going to DNF it because I know I'm trying to DNF more in 2024, but I was like, this is an author I usually love, and the book is so short. Let me just like waste a night on it really and finish it quickly. And it just did not, like, I couldn't wait to beat on it. It did not work for me. The next book I read is another one by an author I love, and it is Finding Margaret Fuller by Alison Pataki. I am a huge, huge fan of Alison Pataki's historical fiction novels. If you are not reading them and you like historical fiction, you are missing out. My favorite one is The Queen's Fortune, which is about Desiree, who was Napoleon's first love. And that was my first introduction to learning about Napoleon and Josephine. And that story is just so amazing. She has 2 books about Empress Sissy. I just really love her novels, and I love that she chooses to write about women that you like all these historical fiction authors I love are choosing to write about remarkable women, and that is what Alison Pataki does as well. But they're also kind of more like under the radar. Like I never would have thought about reading historical fiction about that woman, and I think she kind of does that the best. Like, she doesn't choose the obvious choice, and I love that because you just learn about these women you never would have known about. And that is with Margaret Fuller. And I'm sure some of you listening are like, obviously I know who Margaret Fuller is. I'm sure I had heard of her, I guess, because after reading this, I keep seeing her name everywhere. Even I opened Goodreads yesterday, and the quote that loads up was from Margaret Fuller. So, like, she's very famous. I just never, like, clocked who she was. She is a famous writer, and she was friends with the kind of whole Boston literary Concord circle. So she was friends with Emerson, Hawthorne, Thoreau, and Louisa May Alcott are all in this book. They are like main characters in this book. She was the first woman who was allowed to step foot into Harvard's library. She was the first woman to work as a foreign correspondent. She was on the frontiers of women's suffrage. She had such a wild life. It was so interesting, and I'm so happy that I now know about her life. I gave this book 3 stars because I really liked it. it didn't hit love for me, but I think if you are somebody who loves the classics and all of those authors I listed off before, you would probably really love this because you get to see that like they are the main characters in this book. I'm just not a classics girl, as I think most of us know at this point. So if you are into that and those authors, it would probably be really fun for you. But overall, I thought this was a really great biographical fiction book. I cannot speak today. I guess I can't speak ever because I say that on every episode. But I'm so glad I finally learned who she is. She is such a force. She at one point was named like the um most well-read woman or person in America, and I like want a tote bag with that says that now. I really love this. I love Alison Pataki's writing, so I highly recommend picking up any of her historical fiction books if you haven't yet. The next book was The Boys in the Boat, which I did on audio after seeing the movie. When I went to see the movie, so many people in real life and on Instagram were like, you have to read the book. So I did the book. Honestly, if you're casually interested in the story, I think you could just do the movie. I gave the book 4 stars. I found it interesting how it basically takes everything that happens in the movie. If you're not aware, this is the story of the Seattle rowing team that went on to compete for America in the 1936 Berlin Olympics, which I am fascinated by those Olympics games. The book was interesting because it went a lot more in depth about rowing and the coaches and the boat maker who works with them. And the main character in the movie, Joe, his life is very sad in the movie. And oh, guess what? It was way worse. I was shocked by that in the book. So the book kind of, you're following Joe's life in it. At the same time, you're learning about his time in college and on the rowing team, as you're learning about the sport of rowing, as you're learning about Joe's childhood and kind of ridiculous and crazy upbringing. So there are so many interesting things at play. Like I said, I did this on audio. This was my once a month historical book on audio. I did really enjoy it. I really recommend the movie. I really, really loved the movie. I gave that 4 stars. The next book is Meet the Benedettos by Kate Katongo, which I have covered fully on an episode, so I will just give you a brief overview now, but I gave this 4 stars. This is a modern-day Pride and Prejudice retelling that takes place in Hollywood, which I really loved. Our Lizzie Bennet character is an ex-reality TV star whose whole family starred on a show that reminded me of Pretty Wild. Our Darcy is a theater actor now making the transition over to movies. They kind of have this D-list, I'm D-list, you're B-list, whatever type of relationship. Her sisters are influencers. It was just like very fun and modern. And even if you've never read Pride and Prejudice, I think you would really enjoy this. I'm also a big fan of this author. I loved her other book, Birds of California. So if you want to hear me talk about that one more, head to the episode. I think it was when I talked about, was there an episode where I fully talked about romance? I have amnesia. I don't know. But I know I covered it fully on an episode. The next book I read was The Last Collection by Jan Mackin, and I loved this. I gave this book 4 stars. So basically the theme of this month is that I gave every book 4 stars. I have had this on my shelves for a while, but then one day in February, I took myself on a date to the Met to go see the exhibit in the Costume Institute. It was Women Dressing Women, and they had a bunch of pieces by Chanel and Schiaparelli, who I am huge fans of both of them. I love fashion. I love history. I love fashion history. I honestly love historical fashion more than I love modern fashion, which I don't think should be very surprising to you guys. So when I got home, I picked this book up. I actually had bought it at the Met gift shop a previous time I was at the Met. This is it's a historical fiction about the rivalry between Chanel and Schiaparelli, and it's also a World War II historical fiction, although the war is never really a direct part of the book. So basically what happens, Lily is the main girl. She is an American. She moves to Paris in 1938, and she quickly becomes involved with both Chanel and Schiaparelli. We find out that when she was younger, she had lived in Paris where she fell in love. Her and her husband moved back to England where she was widowed, and now her brother is in Paris having an affair with this very wealthy woman, and he's like, hey, come to Paris and visit. So she goes, and he takes her first they go to Chanel's salon, and she is like, I think she says no for a reason, and then they end up at Schiaparelli because it turns out that Schiaparelli's daughter was a student at the school Lily teaches at. So some fashion history for you. Chanel and Schiaparelli were huge major rivals because Chanel, as we know, is very like clean lines, like kind of not boring, because I'm a huge fan of Chanel's fashion like throughout all of time. But Schiaparelli was more avant-garde, like everything was colorful, and she would have these like very modern, like nowadays when you see in fashion, it'll be like, oh, the theme was like the circus and the whole collection is based on that. Schiaparelli was doing that back in the 30s. So they are just complete opposites. And it is unfortunate that, of course, the two like main female fashion designers couldn't get along, but it was just such a huge contentious rivalry between these two. Like at a party, this happens in the book and this happened in real life. Chanel literally set Schiaparelli on fire. Like these women hated each other. But also, this is taking place in Paris in 1938, and 1938, it like World War II is here basically. So the whole time this book is happening, Lily is working at Schiaparelli. She's friends with Chanel. She's kind of being like a go-between between the two. You get to see so much insight with what's going on in both couture houses, but the world is gearing up for war, and they're like, some of them are saying that the Nazis are definitely going to get control of Paris. Others are like, that is ridiculous. They will never get past the Maginot Line. Chanel and Schiaparelli, very famously, among their many differences, are on the opposite ends of the political spectrum. I learned recently that not everyone knows this. And also, quick side note, I have not yet started watching the show about Dior and the New Look on Apple TV because I'm waiting till there are more episodes out. But I have heard that Chanel plays a huge role in that. And Chanel and Dior were also on opposite sides of World War II because Dior, his sister Catherine Dior, actually was a French resistance worker fighter and ended up in a concentration camp, and I'm pretty sure she survived. So he was very much so against the Nazis, which Schiaparelli is a communist, so she was fully against the Nazis. And Chanel allegedly, it's kind of murky historically, but I think the general consensus is that she was a Nazi collaborator. She was having an affair with a Nazi general, and people think that she was a Nazi spy. So they are like complete opposite ends. And you see as Paris is gearing up as a city for the war and potential invasion, how they are both acting very differently while also being these amazing businesswomen. Their brands and their houses are still alive today. We know them by their names. So I really, really enjoyed this. I loved the fashion. I loved the politics. This is very much like the war. The book doesn't take place over the war. It's like before the war and after the war. But the politics that went into the lead up to the war, like this is probably one of the most political World War II books that I've read. And I just really loved all of it. And I just love historical fiction books about fashion houses and about these specifically the women fashion designers who have changed history. This is a new to me author, and I really, really enjoyed her writing style. So I just picked up her latest release, Picasso's Lovers. I haven't read it yet, but I was very excited to find a new historical fiction author that I love, and she has a nice backlist catalog too that I will be picking up for sure. So that was the last collection. I gave that 4 stars. The next book is Bride by Ali Hazelwood, and shock, I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. This is a bit different for Ali Hazelwood. This is a paranormal romance. Is paranormal the correct term? Where the main girl is a vampire and the main guy is a werewolf, and I loved it. I was a little nervous, which I know a lot of people are nervous. I have had people ask me if they're not ever into like supernatural, is it supernatural romance? Maybe that was the word I was looking for. If they're not into that stuff, like would they like this? And I think if you like Ali Hazelwood's books, then yes, this has her signature trademark touch on it. You can tell it is from Ali Hazelwood. And so if you enjoy her books, you will enjoy this. So like I said, our main girl is a vampire. Her name is Misery, and she lives in this world where it's like vampires, werewolves, and humans coexist at the same time. As a vampire girly, I didn't love how she characterized vampires. Like the vampires are very much the bad guys in this book, and I've just never been into werewolves. I think I've told this story before, but when I was reading New Moon and Edward left, I literally stopped reading the books for months until I was told that Edward came back. So I was just not interested in reading about Jacob and the wolves. I was never a teen wolf girl, never into wolves until I read this book. So Misery is basically forced to marry an alpha of a wolf pack, and like they all the vampires have a territory, the humans have a territory, the wolves have a territory. She is forced to marry Lo, who is an alpha, to kind of like for like a treaty, basically, to keep the peace. So she goes and she's also then forced to live in the werewolf world, which is a lot more similar to how humans live than how vampires did. So obviously, like they fall in love. But beyond the romance, there's so much happening in this book. Like there's a lot of drama in the world and between the species that were so interesting. And Lo has a very little sister, like a very young sister that he takes care of. And she was my favorite part of the book. I loved her so much. And it was like very sweet. And I just really loved this. I had to Google some things about werewolves in a romance. And that's all I'll say on that. But my eyes were opened. It was a very interesting experience. And I'm not against another Omegaverse book. I picked up The Fake Maid. I really like this. And I was saying this recently to a few people, but I feel like we are just so lucky with Allie Hazelwood. She's basically putting out 2 books a year at this point, and they're all just so friggin' good. Like I just love her so much. So if you were worried about this, my answer is give it a shot. I loved it. Like I loved it. I loved it so much. And I will not say anything else for spoilers. I gave that 4 stars. The next book, speaking of vampires, I read The Serpent in the Wings of Night by Krista Broadbent, and I gave this 2 stars. So this is available on Kindle Unlimited. There's 2 or 3 out right now. I got the physical copy. I asked for it for Christmas because I was like, vampires, like I want to read about vampires. This didn't work for me, but for a very specific reason. That the reason it didn't work for me is probably the reason why it will work for other people. So the book opens up and it's like wasteland of a town, like major destruction, and these vampires find this young girl, and then the vampire king swoops in and he takes her. And so it basically turns out that the vampire king took this human girl and raised her as his daughter. But in the beginning of the book, though, it like prophesizes that she will be his downfall. So he raised her, though, in this world where she is always in danger. He like taught her how to defend herself. And like by all accounts, in the first book at least, like he really loves her. She loves him. There's this tournament that takes place like every so many years in this world where you can choose to compete in it, and the winner gets a wish granted from a goddess. So she's a human living in the world of vampires. You can maybe assume what she's going to wish for. So she enters the tournament, and this ends up becoming like the Hunger Games, but vampires. And I have never been a Hunger Games girl. I've never been interested in it. I really don't enjoy reading about tournaments. Like, it is just not for me. That being said, that might be why so many of you love this. So I gave it 2 stars. I'm not continuing the series. The way it did end, though, like I probably would like where the series goes from there. I'm just like, I'm not forcing myself to read things in 2024. So for me, it's like if I don't like the first book in a series, I'm not going to continue the series. So that being said, though, so many of you might like this. The series is on Kindle Unlimited. It just didn't work for me. The romance, at first, I wasn't even sure if that was supposed to be like the love interest, so that was a little confusing. It just wasn't for me. That's really all I have to say about it. The next book I read was Untouchable by Kate Bryan, which is the 3rd book in the private series. So like I said before, I'm not going to go into it, but if you want to hear me talk about the private series as a whole, I did that on a previous episode, and I also have a reel about that on Care and What. The next book I read was The Mayor of Maxwell Street by Avery Cunningham. I gave this 3 stars. I actually really liked this. It was just way too long. This book was over 500 pages, and I think it could have easily been cut down by at least 100. And I probably would have liked it more if it was. It just felt like it was being dragged on for no reason. That being said, the plot and the story and everything was really interesting. So it's the 1920s in Chicago, and our main girl is Nellie, and she is the daughter of the richest Black man in America. And when the book opens up, she's basically been living on like a ranch, I guess, that her family owns in Kentucky because his dad made her dad made his money in horses. So she is now at the family like mansion in Chicago because her brother has just died in a car accident. And like the scene, it opens up and she's at the funeral, and at the funeral she starts meeting like the elite of Chicago Black society. And there's also this guy there who catches her eye. She's not sure who he is. He's wearing like this very flashy suit, and she's just like, huh, like obviously he becomes important for the story. So Nellie is a journalist, and she has been submitting articles to the main Chicago newspaper under an alias, of course, pretending to be a man, because fuck the patriarchy. So she finally meets the editor of the newspaper. They set up this meeting. He thinks he's meeting a guy. It's her. And he is very dismissive of her, but he's like, okay, I'll give you a shot. I'll let you publish under your real name if you can hunt down the elusive mayor of Maxwell Street for me. And he basically is giving her this mission to be like, you are never going to accomplish this. This is so dangerous. You're not going to do it. To like get her like off of his case. But she takes up the mission. So Maxwell Street is basically this place where different immigrants hang out. There are speakeasies. It's kind of a little bit of like a lawless territory. Gangs are running around, and she starts infiltrating this community and getting caught up in all the different gangs, while also having her debut season in society. So there's this huge juxtaposition that I found really interesting. I really loved Nellie, and I did really like the mystery of like who the mayor of Maxwell Street is. Like I said, it just dragged on a little bit too long for me. The next book I read was The Diamond of London by Andrea Penrose, and I gave this 3 stars. This is the real story of Lady Hester Stanhope, who was kind of a prominent figure in Georgian politics in England. This was a really fun introduction to Georgian politics. There are a lot of famous faces that come up, including one of my favorite historical figures, Georgina, the Duchess of Devonshire. They were kind of on opposing sides. Lady Hester Stanhope ends up being like the private secretary to her uncle when he was prime minister, and just like in and involved in politics at a time when like women couldn't even vote. It was very interesting. I gave that 3 stars. Next book I read was The London House by Catherine Ray. This is another new to me historical fiction author, and I loved this book, and I was very excited to see that I have another one of her books already on my shelves, and she has a new book coming out in April, I think. So in this book, our main girl is Caroline, and she grew up in this family that is like a bit dysfunctional. Her dad is from like this wealthy aristocratic English family, but they grew up in England. She has a much older brother. Her sister, who was close in age with her, died when they were children. And after that, like her family was just never the same. And her grandmother lived in what they called the London House, and her grandmother's name was Margaret. Margaret had a twin sister also named Caroline, but she went by Caro, and I'm just going to say Caro for the sake of there being 2 characters named Caroline. And our Caroline knows that she was named after her grandma's twin sister, and she thought that she died in childhood. Then the book opens up though, and Caroline is at work one day, and they're like, hey, this guy is in the lobby for you. So she goes down, and it's this guy she knew in college, and he basically like gets hired to investigate like ancestors. So he was hired by this German family to investigate this guy, and he ended up stumbling across Caro, Margaret's great aunt. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, she died as a child. And he was like, no, your aunt was a World War II spy who defected and married a Nazi. She's like, what are you talking about? So she goes to her dad, and he freaks out and doesn't really want to talk about it. And she is like, I am investigating this. So she ends up going to London, where her mom now lives in the London house, and she goes through her grandmother's things. And this is where the dual timeline comes in. So the current day timeline, Caroline and this guy from college are investigating her grandmother and her great aunt, and they're going through like records and going to all like these government buildings in London trying to find a paper trail on her. And then at the same time, they're reading her grandma's diaries and letters from her sister. So the dual timeline is told through diary entries and letters, which I really loved. And we learn their whole life story, how Caro gets involved in the war. And the mystery is, did she actually defect and marry a Nazi like the public record seems to say? I really enjoyed this. I thought it was pretty unique for a World War II story. It had all the elements I look for, though, in a great historical fiction, let alone a World War II story. The next book I have by the author is Cold War, and I think her new one is too. So it looks like she is like bouncing around historical time periods. I was so into this. Like, I loved all the characters. I loved the mystery element. I gave that 4 stars. The next book I read was Miss Morgan's Brigade by Janet Skills Charles, who is the author of The Paris Library that came out in 2020, and I loved. This is her latest book that comes out on May 7th. I was really into reading arcs this month. I actually usually wait until a book is out or about to come out, but this month I was just like really in the mood to pick up these books. So sorry I'm making you wait, because I did love this one. I gave it 4 stars. This was like one of my most anticipated books of the year because I love The Paris Library so much. So this is a biographical fiction about Jessie Carson, who is a New York Public Library librarian, and she volunteered with Anne Morgan's Card Brigade during World War I. Anne Morgan being J.P. Morgan's daughter, Sonia Morgan, Real Housewives of New York City's distant in-law. So Anne was very ahead of her time, and you learn a lot about her in this book. She is a character in this book, and she, during World War I, when I don't know if America was even in the war at this point, but she was in France, like 40 miles from the front, helping the people, like Red Cross beyond that. Like they are fully in these towns helping them rebuild. And Jessie goes over there to help build libraries. And like I said, they are 40 miles from the front. This town that she is stationed in is absolutely devastated by the war. It's basically just women and children, and like the only men that are there have been severely injured. They become very close with the townspeople. Jessie is kind of like this is very much a book for book lovers. She's using books in the library as a tool to help people rebuild and like find joy in their lives again. The way she does like these reading hours for children who all they know is war and devastation. It was very beautiful to read. This read to me like an episode of Downton Abbey, and that is a very like niche comparison to make. I feel like hopefully some of you will understand what I'm saying. And I mean that because it was kind of slow, and at times it felt like we were going nowhere. And as I was reading it, I was like, is this a 3-star read? But then by the time we finished, I looked back on it and I was like, I am so happy I met these characters and I loved them and I enjoyed their adventures. And it's all the more special that it was real. And sometimes when you're reading something like this book where it's biographical fiction, like, yes, truth is stranger than fiction, but also when you're following such a strict, like this is what actually happened, you don't always get those insane plot twists because the author's not inventing them. They're going off of the historical record. So I did really enjoy this book. It is a little bit slow. It is sad, but it is a book about the power of books. And like also World War I is just so bleak. Like it's like being in the trenches, it's like, oh, like not fun. Like nothing about any of the wars are fun, but like there's just so much mud. But I did really enjoy this book. I think my fellow historical fiction girls will be happy when this one comes out in May. I'm sorry for maybe getting you excited about it so soon, but also the Downton Abbey comparison, because like World War I was a big part of Downton Abbey. The next book I read is also not out yet. I'm sorry. It is She's Not Sorry by Mary Kubica. I gave this 4 stars. So I've had like a roller coaster relationship with Mary Kubica. If you're not familiar, she writes thrillers. They're always a page turner, always kind of like a very unique plot. The first one I read from her was The Good Girl, and I loved it. I remember I was reading it on a plane, and when that plot twist hit, I was shocked. I will never forget that feeling. I also loved Local Gone Missing. And then the last few I wasn't obsessed with, but this one really, really did it for me. This comes out on April 2nd. So if my thriller girls, get ready. This is a good one. So the main girl in this book is Megan, and she is an ICU nurse, and she's currently working for a suicide victim who is in a coma. Suicide is a huge, huge part of the story. So major, major content warning for that. So in the hospital, though, this patient is all anyone is talking about because the story is all over the news. The assumption is that she jumps off of a bridge and she survived it. She's in the coma. Megan is like, she's her nurse, but then she develops a relationship with her parents, and the parents basically ask that she be the only nurse. So now she's basically only working with this one patient. She gets to know the family very well, and she starts kind of like picking up on these red flags as like the parents and the family is talking, and like more people are coming in to visit her. At the same time, this book takes place in Chicago. There is a presumed man on the loose attacking women and sexually assaulting them, and basically following them home and like sexually assaulting them in like their apartment buildings. And this is a huge plot point throughout the book. And I thought that the author did a really great job of writing about the fear that women feel walking around in a major city. Obviously, everything comes together. It feels like there's like different threads happening everywhere, but the way it all came out, I loved this so much. I flew through it. I couldn't put it down. Get excited for this. It comes out April 2nd. The next book I read, I gave that 4 stars. I don't know if I said that. The next book I read was The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon, which I'm just not going to say anything because I have a full episode, 53 minutes of me talking about that book. I did give it 4 stars though. Next up was The White Album by Joan Didion. I gave this 3 stars. This was a reread. I read most of it in college. It was on my 24 and 24. So this was my nonfiction pick for the month. Honestly, I kind of found it boring. I definitely liked it more in college, but just wasn't really for me, and that's all I really have to say about it. The next book I read was The True Queen by Alison Ware. I gave this 4 stars. This is the first in her series about Henry VIII's wives, so if you like Six the Musical, you should pick this series up. This is a biographical fiction about, like I said, his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. I already knew Catherine's story, but I really enjoyed revisiting it. If you're not aware, Catherine was a princess of Spain, came over to England to marry Prince Arthur, Henry VIII's older brother. They got married. Arthur dies. She is kind of in limbo in England for a while. She marries Henry. They're very happy. They have Mary, who became Queen Mary, and then Anne Boleyn comes into the picture. So I already knew Catherine's story, and I find hers to be maybe Catherine Howard's is so sad as well. But Catherine of Aragon's is like up there with maybe the saddest of all of Henry VIII's wives because she was his wife for over 20 years and he just like threw her aside and she stayed so loyal to him. And it's like honestly very inspiring how loyal she was to him. So I knew her story. And like most of it isn't exciting to read because it is sad and frustrating and you just get so angry on her part for how Henry's treating her. But she also like refused to really go against him until she finally stood her ground. When he married Anne Boleyn, he was like, "You're not the queen anymore." And she was like, refused to be called anything but queen because she was like, "No, our marriage is real." As he basically tried to say that their marriage was never real because she had previously been married to his brother. If you are interested in Six and want to get to know more about Henry VIII's wives, which I think you should, we shouldn't just, I'm calling them Henry VIII's wives because that's like the easy way to classify them. But like these were amazing, remarkable women in their own right. And I think it's important that we all learn their story outside of the asshole guy that they all married. This book covered so much historical ground in a really entertaining and easy to digest way. I read it over a few days. I love diving back into the story. It was really cool in the author's note. She mentioned that because obviously they wrote letters to each other. So the majority of the letters and a lot of the dialogue were pulled from history. So that was like very exciting to think that you were reading Catherine's actual words. I was asked if I prefer Alison Ware's series or Philippa Gregory. So Philippa Gregory has a like 16 or 17 book series about the Tudor women. That's like, it covers like the War of the Roses and then all of Henry VIII's wives. I read those books like 6 years ago. That's how I got into historical fiction, through those books. So now I'm reading Alison Ware's, who in like the history space, there's a lot of contention. It seems that historians prefer Alison Ware's historical fiction because she is a historian and she has like so many nonfiction books. I haven't read enough of Alison Ware's yet to say if I prefer hers versus Philippa Gregory's. And I also read Philippa Gregory's so long ago that I don't even really fully remember. And when I read them, though, that was my first introduction to any of their stories. And then I've like gone on to be such a nerd and like do my own research on my own. So like I can't really say, but if you also are like me and have read Philippa Gregory's in the past and you're like, oh, I want to read more about these women though, I'm enjoying learning their story again from a different author. So I'm really excited to continue the series. I think I'm going to do one a month. And then she has so many others about the other Tudor women. So I want to get into like Elizabeth of York, Elizabeth Woodville, all of them. The final book I read is Becoming Madam Secretary by Stephanie Dre. I'm not going to go too much in depth about this because I am planning on covering it in full on a future episode, but this is a historical fiction novel about Frances Perkins, who was the first woman to serve in a presidential cabinet. The president was FDR, who is my favorite president. Fun fact. And Eleanor is my favorite first lady. Another fun fact. Full disclaimer, I'm almost done with it, but I am enjoying it so much. I know this is a 4-star read. It covers so much historical ground. So many insane historic events happened in this. It is the 30s, so it is Depression. She is in New York, like fighting the tenements and for child factory workers and the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. The way that Stephanie Dre wrote about that event, which has haunted me since I learned about it. Just so good. The pacing is so good. She obviously, because she ends up working with FDR is a character in this book, and I love the characterization of him. I'm just so enjoying this. It's pretty long, but it is so entertaining. I really, for all of my like FDR girls, Cardi B, maybe will love this one. Because if you're not familiar, FDR, she's like obsessed with FDR. Highly recommend. I'm a huge fan of Stephanie Dre's historical fiction, and I'm just really, really enjoying this one. Stay tuned. In like a week or two, I will have my full spiel for you. That is our show. Those are all of the books. Thank you so much for listening. I have come to really enjoy going through this monthly wrap up, and I think it's a fun way to just get so many recommendations out to you at once. So thank you so much for listening. Make sure you pick up the book club pick. Listen for the Lie. I forgot what the title was for a second. That episode will be out on March 28th. Submit your thoughts to me by the 26th. Please make sure you're following, subscribe to RZTO on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Leave a rating and review. Let me know that you did, and I will send you a bookmark and some stickers. Follow me on Instagram at @carrotwhat. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl, and I will see you next week. Happy reading.